But let's dive into some of the spoilers on Trials of the Jedi as well. Starting off with the two big things, the two things that kind of dominated adult novels over the entirety of their run in phase one and phase three. And let's start with the first one, which is Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann. We really see what the purpose of that was. And I think that's one of the big things for me that Trials nailed was the fact that these two aren't just lovers. They're not just Jedi who fell in love, and they're not just such great Jedi that they can put aside their passions and their attachments and be this cohesive union. And even though I thought Temptation of the Force did a good job of kind of like from a certain point of view explaining away why these two could be together, it still felt a little weird just with all the stuff we know about Jedi relationships, right? Then you have Trials of the Jedi and you see the way they end, this light and darkness holding the Blight at bay, being two halves of the same whole, united and unified. One, it made me actually like the Blight a little bit more, which I really was not a fan of the Blight for the majority of phase three. I just thought it was kind of underwhelming until this book. But two, it just made their relationship so much more impactful because it feels like there was a purpose to it in the Force. Now there is a specific spiritual reason these two were brought together rather than they just liked each other and they decided to hook up. I thought that was something that really kind of saved one of the plot lines that was extremely well written, but just always kind of weird in the sense that like Star Wars and Jedi, we don't do that really in the prequel era, the post Old Republic era. There's just no real relationships. I thought that was one of the best things they did in Trials of the Jedi. But what were your thoughts overall, Sanak?
I mean, they got their due justice, like you said, in phase three. As someone who read everything in phase one, like almost like day of releases, like I could live with what's going on with Avar in the comics, and it's very important to her character. But then I was frustrated by Claudia Gray not really addressing a lot of that. Like there is some stuff with her and Stellan. I still
Yeah.
think that's one of their biggest flaws as a whole, because if Claudia Gray had at least given her some tertiary perspective in Fallen Star, and in that way informed us about what it would look like from the outside coming into the Starlight Beacon and everything happening on their half of the station. I think that would have been huge. I don't know if it was Claudia, I don't know if it was just a story group. That always bummed me out. But thanks to George Mann and thanks to like Shadows of the Starlight comic miniseries and all that, like we got all of that stuff in full. And by the time we get to Trials of the Jedi, but the whole story is like, this is it. This is our last chance. We're going off a guess. Like returning the Nameless will solve this, right? Like it's not that's how desperate the Jedi are. So I was glad to see like, okay, we got to still honor a lot what about these star-crossed lovers, how they got reconnected, what Elzar did to reach out to her, what Avar grew into after some of her darker, murkier periods that the comics definitely built out, but the books kind of only play around with until Eye of Darkness. Once, you put them together and they're both on the mission immediately, there was a flow to it. It was really nice. It was well equipped. Everything that happened on Planet X with them, Elzar's, I can't hide from my darkness. If anything, Avar's helped me through so much of it. Now's the time for me to do the same for her, and she needs to be the light in the dark. It became about their choices. It became about like, we have this incredible power, incredible abilities, blah blah blah. But now we have to take our relationship to the next level, and that means to finally let go. Right? Like this is the whole thing that Yoda talks about. You can love freely. You can have all this. A Jedi is not stop from loving, but you have to be willing to let go of your attachments, not be afraid of that. And they both proved that they could do that, right? And I think that's wonderful. They found the balance in themselves. They found the balance in their relationship. They found the balance necessary for the whole galaxy. At the end of the day, it is about the people and their connection, their relationship, and what it means to be a Jedi. And I thought that was a great summation for both of their arcs.
So one of the best plot points for me in Trials of the Jedi, one that absolutely had to hit. Let's talk about the other big thing that phase three definitely struggled with, but I thought Charles Soule returning to a character he really loves to write in Marchion Ro did a great job of wrapping up, and that is Marchion and the Nihil. So talking about the Blight, and Rebel Sith, you're commenting on the Blight as well down there, saying you thought it was wrapped up well. I thought it was wrapped up well too. I've been on record since Defy the Storm that I just feel like this Blight was just uninteresting, something that just felt like, okay, we got to have some bigger villain beyond Marchion, because what can Marchion really do if he's no longer like a surprise threat? Now he and the Nihil are directly fighting the Jedi. How do they really stand up to the might of the Jedi Order, right? And it felt like they kind of decided, okay, let's do something that's just nobody can defeat. Like it's just an all-consuming thing. And in doing so, it just felt like it never really had character in its own. It was hard to really get attached or afraid of the Blight because It was something you knew was going to get defeated eventually because it's not in the prequels. And for me, one of the reasons I ended up liking the end of the Blight was because Marchion was given more character. And Marchion as
Yeah.
a whole, to me, was not given his due in phase 3. I did not like how they handled Marchion. I liked Eye of Darkness. I thought Eye of Darkness did a really good job with him. He was still brutal. He was still terrifying. Felt like, okay, here's the next step for him. But at the same time, we also see him floundering a little bit in that book, trying to figure out what's next. He doesn't really care about ruling part of the galaxy. He wants the whole galaxy, and he wants to just be chaotic and be himself. I was never really satisfied with what else they did with Marchion in the rest of phase 3, but I do think it was worth the wait. I still am overall fairly negative on the way Marchion Ro was used throughout phase 3 and used in this phase 3 story. I would have much preferred some type of Nihil versus Jedi plot, but Marchion is used so well in Trials. I love his scene where he confronts all the Jedi, but I still would have loved to see him sprinkled throughout the initiative a bit more. But I love the way he was wrapped up here. I loved his fights with the Jedi. I love getting chapters from his perspective, the manicness of him, the way he just went kind of crazy in this final part of the book, and then his ultimate end, getting sent off on a prison and forgotten when all he's ever wanted to be was bigger than anything in the galaxy. He has very nihilistic thoughts in this story, and he's able to try to become this transcendent icon, and ultimately he falls by the wayside. It's just a little benchmark in history, a little bump in the road for the Jedi, and sent off, and now he's gone. And I thought it was very fitting conclusion for his character. I thought Charles Soule did a great job in this book of wrapping him up. But Sonic, what were your thoughts on Marchion overall?
This was the book that I was expecting from him after The Rising Storm. Like, I liked him in that Eye of Darkness. This one was a different step, right? Because he's insane. He's like, and he's always been insane. That's always been part of his character, like how he rose up, how like everyone was very unassuming about who he is. Ah, he's just like a little runt, and then you're like, wait a minute, he's got this crazy plan. I think what kind of became an issue for me is that I wish Gira Staros and him had more. I think it was really well done in this book. And the other books, it's more like they come and go. It's just not the consistency that I was expecting, right? And I think that was some of my biggest issue. He's okay in Temptation of the Force, but that with that feel I felt like that was a big miss there too. Like the way it was written out here was fantastic. I went so nihilistic. He's like, there's no way I can be happy until everything doesn't exist anymore because that's the only way that I've won. Like insane, truly genuinely insane, and I love the writing around him, the way he treats the Nameless, the way he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna fight you, Belle. I think you remember this lightsaber." Like, oh, it's just he is vicious, he's cruel, he's calculating, and you can see that he's, like, kind of breaking down a little bit too. Not so much from, like, the visions of, like, his ancestors that, like, how, like, everything was kinda hinted at the end of phase 1 and the beginning of phase 3, but more just, like, dissatisfaction with, like, what he achieved, right? What everybody else is like, "You've done something major and insane, but you gotta hold it." He's like, "That doesn't mean anything to me. I need this to be get, like, joy out of it." Like, the dude is laughing knowing, like, "Oh my god, like, the Blight's gonna get accelerated every time I kill a Nameless and drive them off the cliff." And then immediately he's like, "Oh, I hate this. I hate that I don't know the exact details of how much the Blight is gonna spread on this planet or which planet comes next." Truly a psychotic creature by this book, and it was just fascinating to see him play out that way. And that final chapter with him, I was a big fan of. There's nothing to care about. There's nothing for him there. It is pathetic. It is sad. I just wish some of that patheticness, the sadness, and all that was just a little bit more developed. That's the thing that I really missed that phase 1 really balanced. Like, he's doing these things, but he's also thinking these things, and we get to see both.
Yeah, definitely. And I very much so in agreement with that. Like the balance was completely missing for Marchion. He was so good and maybe unintentionally so. Like maybe they didn't mean to create what was starting to become one of our favorite Star Wars villains of the last 10, 15 years, but they did in Light of the Jedi and the Rising Storm. And then they kind of just said, well, now what do we do with him now that he's kind of reached the peak of his potential? What do we do with him? He's kind of just doesn't know what to do with himself, so we don't know what to do with him. And that on its face, that can be an idea that maybe in a long form TV show is something that can work. But in a medium like this, you don't want one of your most interesting characters to just be sitting on his hands doing nothing. But I'm glad Charles Soule was able to resurrect it a bit. Let's talk about the Nameless, because I did love the way it connected with the Nameless. We all knew it was going to have some type of connection to the Nameless because of not just what they do with phase 2, but because obviously it has the same properties that the Nameless have. And in Temptation of the Force, they discover that it has very similar things that work on the Nameless, work on the Blight. And so we knew that was coming, but I definitely didn't expect like Nameless chief who could communicate in your mind and talk to you and and has this like way with the force. Like I thought all that stuff was trippy, interesting, and I liked it. I like that type of Star Wars. I like that type of fantasy in Star Wars. You have these creatures who can commune through telepathic creatures, and I liked all of that. I liked everything on Planet X that had to do with the Blight origins and the Nameless, and I liked how that all played into Avar and Elzar's journey. So that to me is really what saved the Blight from being completely uninteresting, because it had a basis in this kind of more interesting Force culture, Force lore, and ultimately Virgins and the Force, which I think they were kind of expecting probably to hit a lot harder because the Acolyte did it. I'm not saying that Trials did it only because of the Acolyte. In fact, Trials might have had this all planned out first, but I do think they were hoping that like you'd have the idea of the Virgins and like the mystery around that hit in the Acolyte, and people would start to get familiar with that on a grander scale, a much larger amount of people than who are reading the High Republic. And then you have Virgins dropped as well in this story. And it's like, okay, yeah, what's really going on with the Force at this time? There's like a lot of different mysteries around the different Virgins points and the way the Force is popping up in these interesting ways across the galaxy and different aspects of the galaxy and different areas and different breeds and like the way it's creating these creatures and all this stuff. But ultimately, I thought the Virgins idea worked way better here. I mean, I'm always a little bit more interested in the way a Virgins can create devastation like this. But yeah, Sonic, what did you think of ultimately the Nameless conclusion, the way the Blight was wrapped up, and the way Charles Soule used the Virgins here on Planet X to be kind of the answer for our Blight issue?
I'm mostly positive on it. I'll say I'm very positive on the Nameless stuff because, like you said, I like that. It was out of left field. I was like, "Oh, they're not even, like, supposed to look like that as they're shown, right? They're not really monsters. They're kind of, like, very elegant looking, long-armed, like, creatures that are just meditating and swaying. They're not, like, celestials or anything per se, but, they're very interesting creatures that are almost kinda living in their own portal dimension. I was hoping reading when they describe, like, the very solid disc with, like, all the different floating little pieces and all that, you're like, "Oh, is this something that's maybe Sith or something?" Then you actually go into it and you're like, "Oh, it is not at all the same thing at all." Because 1, Elzar was stupid enough to reach out and go into it, but 2, you're like, "Oh, okay, like, there's a whole different dimension, like, it's all darkness and everything, and, Avar and, there's other Nameless in there, but then there's these, like, pure Nameless inside with the eggs and all that." You're like, "Oh." Absolutely loved it. I loved everything with, like, the concept of Planet X kinda being formed out of a virgin, so like an entire planet. Like, I think if you wrote something like New Jedi Order today, so Nomesicat's probably built out of, like, that same concept, like, there was a tear in the universe, and then from there came this planet, right? So, I think the Blight stuff I do have some issues with, and it's more just because, like, the Blight still in this book dominates so much. I know, like, some of it is, like, the effect of the Nameless once you get this whole twist about them. My issue is, like, okay, that was all safe for, like, the last 25-30% of the book, and then we got these Blight with the interludes and all that, and you're like, "I get it. It's consuming. I get it. I know it's sad for the family and all that. I understand." But it's like, why can't we have a little bit more direct connections with the eggs and the Nameless themselves? Like, I understand hiding, like, the implication and, like, in Temptation of the Force with the Nameless and how they're deployed out and all that. I don't think the eggs were really ever truly used in the same way. And you read something like Into the Light, you're like, "Oh, so there's some very interesting mutated Drengir that are being used. Okay, interesting, cool." But the Blight is here. And you're like, "Is that because of the Drengir or something?" And there's no real hints of like, "Oh, like, we found some broken eggs or something." Like, just, like, a throwaway line and stuff, I think would have been better in the middle of phase 3 to been like, "Okay, like, here's some things that we don't know what it means yet," or, like, it seems like lines like, "Okay, sure, there was a Nameless on this planet." Still, having a little bit more of that would have really set up Trials of the Jedi. There's so much about the middle of phase 3 that Trials of the Jedi almost kinda assumes you're like, you have to read everything again like phase 1 and get an idea that there is a connection being made here. Okay, Blight just immediately gets neutralized, right? So not having something very concrete about why it happens on these planets, right? Kinda just like shuffling through the end of like, it just kind of relapses and like, falls in on itself. Like, I was like, "Okay." That's the one thing I was like, I wish that could have been a little bit more deliberate about, because everything with the Nameless themselves and, like, your mutations with the Nihil experimentation was like the Drengir too, that's very deliberate. Like, you didn't have to love all the execution of those ideas, but you can understand exactly what was happening. Like, yeah, do I love that the Drengir can kinda talk and they can fly a ship? No, not really, but there's still, like, very clear direction about what they're doing and what's being said and done for them. Once the Blight is finally eradicated from the galaxy, what are the effects? The Blight itself, I'm like, "Well, at least leave us with consequences. At least leave us with, like, there's a good, like, 40 planets in the galaxy now that used to be so much richer in elements and industries and all that, but now are Tatooine. Now they're like, like, where it's just one biome. If you had done something deliberate like that, I think that it starts to explain, like, what people feel about, like, "Oh, once the planet accelerated, it wasn't just 30, it might have been 300 by the end, and that's why these planets in some places are so rich, and other places they're not so much, and they're so dependent on the Republic, bringing resource, all that," and that causes strain on the government, on the ideals of the High Republic, like Lena was talking about. Lets characters like the Trade Federation with old and new technology that Gira sells off, kinda like, "Oh, you don't have that? Well, I have these droids," and stuff like these could have been really interesting placements. The Blight stuff, I was like, it was there for the longest time in Phase 3, and then it just in a snap, it's gone. I'm like, I just wish at least consequence remained for it."
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, right now, it is definitely one of the things that, like, while wrapped up well, I was wanting a bit more from with Trials. And I think that's the last maybe point we talk about here in our spoiler discussion with Trials. What our overall thoughts are now we've sat on this book, right? We've read this over 3 weeks ago, and we've now sat with this book for a while. Do you still hold with the score you gave it? Because for me, I still feel the same way. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I would hold with that. It's the things that are just left there that I think are the only things that rub you a little bit of the wrong way. And I don't necessarily blame Charles Soule and Trials of the Jedi for that. It feels like something you blame the High Republic as a whole for. Again, like we talked about a little bit earlier, just bit off more than it can chew. It had so many sets of characters, so many things going on that it was hard to wrap up everything. And even in a book that was 400 something pages, it couldn't wrap up every little plot point that was going on with the entire phase. And so I would have loved to see the second books, especially, do a little bit more heavy lifting to help wrap these things up. Like, I thought the middle of Phase 3 just didn't really lift anything up. Tears of the Nameless was great, and it definitely got us closer to this conflict, but there was nothing targeting the rest of the galaxy, right? It was also hyper focused on the Blight conflict and just fixing the Blight, that there were things around the rest of the galaxy that definitely felt like, what's next? What's the aftermath? Where do we go? And I thought the epilogue, while nice for our main characters, definitely left the galaxy in a place that where I'm like, okay, so now where do we go? Like, we have a great speech from Lena. So what's, Joe Schmo's thoughts from Tatooine? Like, what are his thoughts on what just happened? Because we don't know the galactic ramifications of this, and it feels like it should be a lot more than what we have seen so far. So I still find those small criticisms, but I still felt like this book was extremely well written. It tackled everything I wanted it to tackle. It nailed so many of the things that I felt like were make or break for the High Republic as a whole, whether it be Avar, Elzar, whether it be Marchion, whether it be the Nameless, all these things that could be major plot holes for future Star Wars stuff. I thought it wrapped them up extremely well. It made this story worth reading and something I'm excited to return to one day, and something I absolutely recommend to everybody else. So overall, Trials, still even 3 weeks on, feels like something I am extremely satisfied with, and something I am thinking about a lot. Like, I keep going back to this book, and I have way more good memories upon my time reading this than negative ones in terms of where the story left you. Because oftentimes you can read a book and you have pros and cons when you review it, but then you wait a little bit of time, and then like 2-3 weeks go by, and you're like, okay, the cons are actually sticking with me far more than the pros, or vice versa. This time, the pros are still so much superior to the cons.
Yeah, I think I gave it like a 4.25, and I hold by that. I spent a lot of today kind of just, reading through a lot of the book, especially more the back end stuff. I was a fan of this book when I first read it. I let it sink a little bit in the last couple weeks, and now I'm like, yeah, no, this is still really good. Like I said, I did like everything on Planet X quite a bit. A lot of the criticisms that I have with this book, again, do not fall on Charles Soule. It falls very much on just Phase 3, kind of losing a lot of those like steadying voices of Phase 1 that seemed like they were fully in sync. I wish that could have been rectified with an even longer book, arguably, 'cause I think Charles Soule could have handled like another 100 pages. Because everything else by the end, when it's accelerating every character that we've spent time with, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. That's worth it. But yeah, I can't blame him. He was the book ender. It just feels like everybody was still kinda stuck on, like, "This is my book, this is my author, this is my characters, and I'll stick with that," when Phase 3 should have been the most, like, connected between every book, between every reading level. Still, I would give it a 4.25. I think it's just another 100 pages. This could have honestly been, like, a 5 out of 5, like, book for me.
Hello there, Star Wars Lads fans. Thank you so much for watching this video. This was actually a clip from one of our live streams and Q&As. So if you'd like to join us every single Tuesday around 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, make sure you join us. It'll allow you to ask a question that might be turned into a video. Hopefully you join us. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below all of your thoughts on this clip. Thanks for watching, and we will see you all next time.